everyone, this is Katie from Katie Loves Classic Books, and I'm finally here with my February wrap-up. I'm sorry it's taken so long for me to finally film this, but I finally had time and space today, so I was really grateful for that because I really want to tell you all about the books I've been reading. So, the first book I read in February was the Book of Disquiet by the Portuguese writer Fernando Pessoa. And this was published after his death in 1982, but it was written between the 1910s and 1930s. This is, I guess, a piece of modernist literature, but it really defies being put into any category, really. It's unlike anything I've ever read before, and it's very unique. It consists of these different fragments that could really be read in any order, and it wasn't really clear when they found this trunk of his writings after he had died. What order he meant to put them in, but it really could, all these fragments really could be put into any order. Okay, so what this is they're the writings of a fictional writer and like persona that Fernando had taken on. He did that a lot. He had many like heteronyms, I believe they're called, and he wrote under all these different names. And so the writer of the Book of Disquiet, Bernardo, is one of those. And Bernardo leads a very solitary life. He's an assistant bookkeeper in Lisbon, and he lives and works on the same street, and he never really leaves that street, to be honest. What he is he is a dreamer and a writer of prose. And these are basically supposed to be his writings, and it's rather like a factless autobiography. It's about him and his life, but not really his outer life, which really doesn't consist of much. It's all about his inner life, which is just really interesting and different from most fiction, you know. So I did have to like really space out the reading of this one. Like I could only read it for like 10 to like 25 minutes at a time, and then I have to take breaks. Although I feel like I did get through this rather quickly for what it is. But to appreciate it and so it doesn't get too repetitive, it needed space in between the readings of it. So there were, first of all, like, this had so many wonderful quotes in it, like more than any book I've read in a long time. Like I wrote so many quotes down, which I put in my Tumblr, and just some like quotes and thoughts just really stuck with me. And he has such wonderful thoughts and ideas about certain things that were just pretty profound. But interspersed with that, there were a lot of repetitive sections, and kind of it could get tedious. And he even describes he like has this tedium with life that he just describes over and over again, and so him describing this tedium is tedious. And it was interesting, but it could get hard to get through at sometimes. But overall, I think it really stuck with me, and just some of the thoughts really stuck with me. There were like some descriptions of, I guess, like the scenery and landscape around him that were beautiful, but yet also tedious because he never really leaves this street he lives on and works on. And yeah, it's kind of his musings as he as he seeks to kind of disintegrate his ego and his persona and kind of merge with the whole. And that's kind of what he does when he's dreaming and writing. So he doesn't even really know who he is anymore, and just he's like so separated from the material physical plane and from his outer life. And that was really fascinating. And yeah, it was just a completely different perspective than I'm used to reading. And it was just really cool and different, and a weird, cool, and sometimes difficult reading experience. But overall, now, because I've had more space from it than usual before I talk about books, it really did stick with me. And like I said, just some of the thoughts in this book have really stuck with me. And so I'm really glad to have read it. And if you do want to like read any of the quotes that I thought were cool from this book, you can check out my Tumblr and just like scroll back to when I was reading it, or search it or something, the Book of Disquiet, and you can read them because they're cool. And of course, I'll link that below in the description. So yeah, really cool, really interesting. I don't know how highly I recommend this. Like, if that sounds like something you are cool with and you have the patience to get through it, then I think there's a lot to get out of here. But if that doesn't sound interesting to you, and you want like a real story, and you don't want things to get too tedious, and you don't have the patience for that, and you want to read about like somebody's life that has like a plot, then this would not be for you. But those who, want some interesting thoughts on life and a different perspective, and kind of the loss of the ego, and just what it means to dream and have a dream life, and are interested in like kind of modernist, like unique literature that kind of defies what a book usually is and is about, then I think you would enjoy this. So that's the Book of Disquiet. Oh, and did I say how many stars I gave this on Goodreads? I think I gave it 4. So yeah, pretty good. After the Book of Disquiet, I decided to pick up a few books by authors that I already know that I quite like, and but that I feel like I should read more regularly because I want to get through, all of their work, or a lot of it maybe, depending on how much I continue to like them. And so I did that with a few authors, and that was pretty fun. So the first author I decided to read more of was Sarah Waters. Now, I'd only read one book by her previously, but other ones I had read more than one, so I knew that I liked them a bit more, but I just loved Fingersmith by Sarah Waters so much that I just had to read another of her books, and that was Tipping the Velvet, and this was published in 1998, and this was Sarah Waters' first novel. And this follows a girl named Nancy, and she's living, so this is historical fiction set in the late Victorian era, and Nancy lives in a seaside town, and she is an oyster girl, which is some not so subtle symbolism. And at a local music hall, she meets a male impersonator named Kitty Butler, and she basically falls in love with her and follows her to London and eventually joins her act. And all doesn't really go as she thinks it will, as she kind of comes of age, explores like the music hall scene, the LGBTQ scene in the Victorian era, and yeah. So, in terms of historical fiction, this was both really good and really brought the Victorian era to life, which with my previous experience with Sarah Waters, I really felt as well. Yeah, I felt this one was also a bit gratuitous. So yeah, so on one hand it was really interesting and really brought it to life, and I really loved the music hall scene part in particular, and it was interesting seeing kind of the LGBTQ scene at the time, but that is where it got a bit indulgent, and I don't know if that's like bad or not, you know. There isn't that much known about lesbians in particular in that era, and I don't think there's a lot written down, so Sarah Waters kind of fills in the gaps, and on one level that's really cool, and again, in some parts she was maybe a bit too indulgent. But like, I don't know if I completely dislike that or not. That's just kind of how I saw it. As a coming of age story and Nancy coming into her own, this was really good. She definitely grew as a character throughout the novel, which was cool, because at first she's so shy and awkward, and she really becomes very confident in herself and her sexuality and who she is, and is kind of cocky and confident and has this certain like personality by the end that was really enjoyable to read about. And just as she navigates relationships and the different types of relationships, I feel like that's almost the most relatable part of this. She experiences the sweetness of first love. She experiences a unhealthy relationship following after that. That is just not good, which can so often happen. And then she experiences love again, but from a more grounded and mature standpoint. So it's cool to watch her explore those different types of things, and I just feel like that was realistic and relatable, kind of the arc of her exploration of relationships. And all the characters were interesting, all her love interests were interesting. I think I liked Kitty Butler the best. It was interesting because she had like an opposite progression as Nancy did as a character. Like at first she seems so confident in who she is and what she does, but at the end she seems kind of scared of it and like she suppressed it, which was interesting. And yeah, and I think a later love interest, Florence, was my least favorite. So I'm not really sure what I thought of the ending. Like it was good, but somehow that section and that character were not my favorite, and I wasn't as attached at that point. Yeah. So this was good. Like, it just wasn't perfect. You can definitely tell it's her first novel. On one hand, it was really cool, and I really did like Nancy and her coming of age, and I liked the historical element and this exploration of this era, and the LGBTQ scene, which is not something you really read about in historical fiction. That's kind of what Sarah Waters does for the most part, I believe. Is she writes historical fiction, but usually with LGBTQ characters, usually lesbian, I believe. And there isn't a lot of that, so she really like pioneered that, I would say. And in some respects, this was fun and great. I just saw that it wasn't quite perfect, and perhaps, yeah, I don't know, there were just like elements of it that I didn't love as much. Fingersmith, I absolutely loved. And I think part of it that really made that for me was that there was such a wonderful air of mystery about it that was just so compelling. And the structure of it was really interesting, and she wrote it in a unique way. And I think that's what this was lacking, and maybe that's why I love Sarah Waters, is the historical fiction element and all that, and her storytelling. But it's also that sense of like mystery and structure, and I don't know if other novels are like that or not, but this just didn't have that. It was written in a pretty straightforward manner, and there was no mystery about it, and so I think that's why I didn't love this as much as I loved Fingersmith. Um, but I will be continuing to check out her work. Maybe not, I won't be as eager to read another one by her as I am by some of the other uh, writers I was reading this month. But maybe, I don't know. I'm still pretty curious. I just think this was the first one and wasn't quite perfect. But it was still really enjoyable, don't get me wrong. And also, it was very steamy, too, I will say. And Tipping the Velvet is not what you think it is. Or maybe it is exactly what you think it is. So, that's Tipping the Velvet. Next writer I wanted to read more of is Daphne du Maurier, and I have read quite a few of her books. I've read Rebecca, My Cousin Rachel, Jamaica Inn, The Birds and Other Stories, and yeah, and now Frenchman's Creek. And this was published in 1941, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I adored this book so much. Definitely my favorite of the month, and just a new favorite in general. So, this is also historical fiction set in the 17th century. It follows a woman named Donna who is sick of the indulgent life and of the Restoration Court, and also just her loveless marriage to her husband. So she takes her children to a family estate in Cornwall to escape for a while. And while there, she finds the freedom she's been desiring and the love and passion with a French pirate who has been plaguing the coasts of Cornwall. Oh my gosh. So, first of all, Daphne du Maurier is just such a wonderful writer. She is a master storyteller. So fantastic. And her writing is just so absorbing and so beautiful and impeccable. And her sense of atmosphere and her settings are really, really great. I mean, she does atmosphere better than, I don't know, anyone, most writers. And the way she always makes the natural world come to life and really just reflect the mood, especially of her beloved Cornwall. And also, the old houses that are usually in her books, I feel like, because there's an old house in this book, but then there's also, the pirate ship. And I feel like the pirate ship kind of is described just like how she usually does the old houses. So yeah, just wonderful atmosphere, wonderful storytelling, beautiful writing. And Donna was just one of the best characters I've read about in a long time. I mean, I absolutely adored her. She just, well, maybe not just her, but also the story just speaks to the part of people that just craves freedom and all the love and passion with their whole soul. I don't know if everyone feels like that, but if you have a part of that in you, this book speaks to that, and Donna speaks to that, and it just brings that alive in you. It brought that alive in me. And it is kind of indulgent in a good way, because you can get so swept up into it and live vicariously through Donna and all that she gets. Yet, it wasn't completely easy for Donna, all this kind of reckless and free abandon is juxtaposed with her responsibility. And she did live in a difficult period of time for women, and you see that. And she is in a marriage, and men of the time, had all the power. And you see kind of the men, besides the pirate, the other men around her that seek to control and suppress. And she does have children too, and she has responsibility for them as well. And yeah, so you see that. but she's just such an admirable character. So headstrong and so determined to have what she wants. But yet, like I said, she doesn't forget about her responsibility. And she's just this person who lives completely in the present. And it's like she lives so completely in those moments that perhaps even if she can't have them forever, she has lived a full life. And yeah, she was just a wonderful character because of that. And the pirate, was a wonderful male counterpart for her. He was wonderful as well and kind of felt similarly. And yeah, and you just totally root for them. And part of me, wishes Donna would be completely reckless and live exactly the type of life she wants to. Although then maybe she wouldn't be admirable because maybe that would be selfish. Um, but yet, I don't know, I couldn't help but want that for her so badly. And there was another character that was really wonderful too, a servant of Donna's named William, and just their witty banter and just kind of his whole personality. He was really loyal, but just his whole personality. And then, I don't want to spoil anything, but kind of what he is revealed to be is pretty cool too. And he was just a wonderful character. Yeah, so I just adored this book. I didn't want it to end, and it was just lovely in every way and just so wonderful and such a wonderful experience and so well written. And I think this might be my favorite Daphne du Maurier now. I've really liked everything I've read by her, so it's really hard to pick favorites, but I think this might be my new favorite. Before it was tied between Rebecca, which of course is the very famous novel of hers that was turned into a Hitchcock film, and most people love that one. And I do really love that one because it's just such a masterpiece. And then Jamaica Ann as well was one that I really loved, and I could never decide between them. Sometimes I felt like Jamaica Ann, sometimes Rebecca. So they were tied for my favorite before, but now I think Frenchman's Creek kind of beat them out, at least by a little bit. And this was just so good. And if this sounds like something you'd like, I highly recommend it. And I just highly recommend Daphne du Maurier in general. She was a fantastic writer, and I definitely will be reading more of her books because I just need to read them all, honestly. I wanted to read more of is Dodie Smith, and I have previously read 2 of her books. The first is I Capture the Castle, and the second, The New Moon with the Old. And I Capture the Castle is one of my favorite books of all time. And so the third one I decided to read was The Town in Bloom, which was published in 1965, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So this starts out, and it's following some elderly friends, and they meet every 5 years for lunch, where they reminisce about their youth in the 1920s London theater scene. So the bulk of the novel is set in the 1920s, but then it's sandwiched between these short sections when they're older. And we mostly follow a girl who is nicknamed Mouse, as she navigates her newfound independence, her desire to be an actress, and first love and difficult relationships, as well as friendships that last a lifetime. And yeah, I loved the description of the Crossway Theater, which is the theater that this novel revolves around, and just the whole theater scene was really fun. And I just really loved Mouse as a character. She was very charming and quirky, as most of Dodie Smith's characters are. Dodie Smith just always has really awesome, quirky, charming characters that just kind of stay with you and kind of stick out. And Mouse was no exception. The other characters in the book were good too, but she just really stood out, and she was very endearing and kind of had me giggling a lot at the things she did, just like the other characters in the book did in relation to her. And yeah, Dodie Smith writes such charming books, and this is no exception, except they aren't like really all light and fluffy. There are usually more complex themes within them and kind of a sense of melancholy underneath the surface. And that's definitely how I felt about this one. I especially thought because the like coming of age section was sandwiched between the older perspectives, it particularly stood out kind of this like wistful nostalgia and kind of the realities of life and love and everything not exactly turning out all perfect. And it's like they still don't have it figured out when they're older either. This definitely explores Mouse kind of finding her way, although like I said, it's like she never necessarily finds it, but she really wants to be an actress. But not to really spoil anything, but that doesn't really work out for her. And so perhaps there's some disappointment there that she needs to work through. And this definitely is interesting in terms of relationships, really explored extramarital affairs in particular, and that can be complex and messy, but most of the characters, that's pretty much what they were ending up in. And it's interesting, in Dodie Smith books, most of the protagonists fall for men much older than themselves. And while the books are so charming, you don't realize it, there really isn't any like happy romantic ending or conclusion. They're a bit strange and complex and maybe not the healthiest. So there was that. And also, just in the 1920s, these girls had a newfound kind of sexual freedom in that era, so they were exploring that as well, I think. Yeah, so I just really enjoyed this one. It was a fun setting. It had that typical Dodie Smith charm in terms of story and in terms of characters that I love, and the quirky characters, but yet the fact that I think why I like her books is that they're charming, but it is because of the underlying complexity or melancholy that kind of maybe just add some depth or reality to them that kind of just sticks out to me. So I definitely want to read more Dodie Smith, for sure. Well, I did give this 5 stars. Like, it was not my favorite. I just thought it was really good, and I just really enjoyed it, honestly. But my favorite probably will always be I Capture the Castle. That is just a fantastic book, and I really recommend that. Although, if this sounds like something you'd like, I do recommend this as well. The last author I decided to read this month was David Mitchell, and now I have completed all of David Mitchell's books, and he is one of my favorite contemporary authors. I absolutely adore his work. Yeah, and so the last one I read of his was Black Swan Green. And so, I'm trying to think. So my favorite to least favorite of his books now is as follows. So Cloud Atlas will forever be one of my favorite books. It is one of my favorite books of all time. I adore it and impacted me so much. And then The Thousand Autumns of Jakob de Zoet, The Bone Clocks, Ghost Written, and I think Black Swan Green, Slade House, and then Number 9 Dream. And I've liked all of his books and loved most of them, to be honest. He usually writes very complex novels, which is partly why I love him. I love that complexity. And I saved Black Swan Green for last because it sounded so normal and possibly boring and not something I was interested in. But then I was like, well, I read all the other ones. I gotta finish it out. And I'm glad I did because I enjoyed this so much more than I thought. So this was published in 2006, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. It follows a 13-year-old boy named Jason Taylor. Let's see. Taylor. Growing up in the 80s in England in a small town. And it basically follows a year in his life. There are 13 chapters detailing certain episodes of his 13th year of life, which is cool. And the writing style was great, as is typical of David Mitchell, and he also just really captured the slang of the time. And so Jason is just struggling with a lot of issues that adolescents face, bullying, kind of coming into his own and trying to accept himself versus trying to fit in. His parents' marriage disintegrating. He stammers, which is, a difficulty he must come to terms with within himself, and just especially growing up as a boy, and you just see the particular difficulties of that because a lot of his true interests would not be deemed cool for a boy, and that was kind of sad to read about, honestly, and depressing. um, but it was really fascinating and just real, and just shows kind of how cruel kids can be and how unaccepting, and just kind of their non-acceptance of those that are different than themselves, and kind of it is also showed like kind of juxtaposed with how that carries on into adulthood, um, again, which is sad but interesting to read about. um, I liked how his parents' marriage disintegrating kind of was juxtaposed with the Falklands War that was going on at the time, which I had never heard of before. But still, it was like the personal war and the non-personal war kind of going on at the same time, which was an interesting comparison. Um, what was so cool about this is that it's pretty much known that this is semi-autobiographical, and Jason has a tremendous amount of similarities to David Mitchell, like his birthday, being the same age that he was in that year, living in the same place, being a stammerer, wanting to be a writer. I mean, pretty much everything. And I thought that was really cool because after reading all of David Mitchell's other novels, and they're so complex, it was cool to read something just so personal about him, because after I've read all his books, I kind of did care about him and his upbringing, and kind of what led him, to be the writer he is today. And so that was cool, and I enjoyed it. And also, he does this cool thing where, like, they're not a series at all, but all his books are kind of set in the same world. You could say this one version of reality, and some of his books, veer off reality as well. But they're still set in the same David Mitchell universe, and so there are recurring characters, and so I noticed some characters from other books in Black Swan Green, and so that was really fun. I always enjoy those little like Easter eggs in his books. So yeah, so this was really enjoyable actually, and a wonderful coming of age story. And even though I love David Mitchell for his complexity, I loved reading a book that was seemingly more normal at the same time, and just a part of his upbringing and childhood, and just something very close to home for him. And so I do actually quite recommend this. If it sounds like something you'd like, I recommend it. Even if it doesn't, if you are a David Mitchell fan and you're hesitant about this one for the same reasons that I was, I do actually recommend it. But if you like coming of age stories and you want one, especially from a boy's perspective, this is a good one. I guess I do like coming of age stories, but probably because I'm a female, I like female coming of age stories, and that's why like an adolescent boy in the 80s did not sound appealing to me. But it was really good and very poignant, and David Mitchell is just truly a magnificent writer, and I hope now that I've read everything he's written, I hope he writes something new soon, because I really need to read more of his work, because he's just I don't know, the master. He's awesome. So, those were all the books I read in February. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have read any of these books or have something you want to recommend to me or something along those lines, feel free to comment below. I will put in the description box both my Tumblr, like I said, and my Goodreads. So I write written reviews for every book I read, and so I post them both on Tumblr and Goodreads. And like I said, with the Book of Disquiet, I post quotes on my Tumblr as well. So if you want to read some of those, especially from the Book of Disquiet, you can find them there. And I also have a Patreon account. And so if you would like to support me, which is always super appreciated, I will link that below as well. And I do have a few patrons, and I'm so grateful for your support. It's just such a kind gesture and really nice of you. And you know, books cost money since I buy them, and so it's really nice to like have that support so I can continue to, buy lots of books and read lots of books. I think in a few minutes I'm actually going to film my March wrap up because it's now April. I'm behind, so that will be up shortly after this video, I think. So you might get two at once. Yeah, so look out for that soon, and then I will see you for my April wrap up as well. Hopefully, I'll be able to do that one more on time. So have a great month, everybody. Bye.